Right, so an all-new case reminiscent of the one South Africa has brought against Israel is now also before the International Court of Justice. And given the severity, but also how little it has been spoken about, especially in light of atrocities in Gaza and the wider Middle East, which go too often unreported, but even that has gained far more coverage than this latest legal case is concerned with. The case before the ICJ now concerns the matter of the ongoing atrocities being committed in Sudan, a conflict that has also been raging since 2023, though predates Israel's egregious actions in Gaza following the night of October 7th by several months. While the two sides of this conflict are both Sudanese elements, one side is apparently getting some backing from a certain Middle Eastern nation, and for once, it isn't Israel we're talking about here, but actually the United Arab Emirates, a nation that so often positions itself as neutral, as a moderator, and a stabilising element in regional conflict, yet now they stand accused of aiding and abetting in acts of genocide against the Sudanese ethnic minority Masalit population. As you can imagine, they aren't very happy about that, but using one of Israel's well-worn excuses in their ICJ case isn't the win the UAE might think it is either. Right, so the ongoing conflict in Sudan, which you have probably not heard a great deal about, but given it came up briefly in a video I made the other day, I thought I'd give it some attention, some coverage. It certainly warrants some, especially in light of a not too dissimilar turn of events there, as we've seen with regards to Israel as well. The case of genocide brought against them by South Africa at the ICJ still ongoing, as we know. Well, conflict erupted in Sudan in April 2023 between the Sudanese Armed Forces, the SAF, and the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF. Now, the Sudanese Armed Forces are, as you might rightly imagine to be, the Sudanese Army, the nation's armed forces. The Rapid Support Forces were once on the side of the government too. They appeared in 2013. They were built out of the local Janjaweed militias, the Janjaweed being nomadic Arabs from the Sahel region that spans northern Africa, a number of nations it crosses, including Sudan. Not dissimilar to what we've seen popping up in pockets across the Middle East, notably right at this moment in time in southern Syria. A support force is what it was, clue is in the name. But in April 2023 they went rogue, mobilised their forces in certain cities, the most notable being Darfur, turned on the government forces and the SAF, and have declared a new government overseeing the territory they have seized, the so-called Government of Peace and Unity. But the crimes they are accused of, and that of the UAE are accused of supporting, are anything but representative of anything resembling peace and unity. Well, the situation in Sudan has descended into one of the most devastating humanitarian crises of the 21st century. Amidst the chaos, allegations of genocide have emerged, with the Masalit people, who are a non-Arabic, non-nomadic, black ethnic group in Darfur, bearing the brunt of the violence. The reason the RSF turned on the SAF and the Sudanese government, leading to the current conflict in Sudan, can be traced back to the tensions that built up between the SAF's leadership, led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and that of the RSF, this supporting paramilitary group, which was commanded by General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemedti. Well, the RSF had grown in power since 2013 into a bigger and bigger force, more powerful force in its own right, to the point it ended up rivaling the SAF itself in size and strength. And that rivalry between the two leaderships escalated into open warfare in April 2023, following a failed power-sharing agreement and disputes over the integration of the RSF officially into the National Army. So this has been a conflict of extreme violence ever since, including widespread atrocities against civilians, especially which has displaced some 10 million people. Nearly 2 million people have fled Sudan entirely, and there are tens of thousands dead. Everything you've heard Israel doing in Gaza has been done to civilians in Sudan, and notably to this group, the Masalit, at the hands of the RSF. The RSF in particular has been accused of systematic attacks on ethnic groups in Darfur, notably the Masalit, who have been targeted for their perceived opposition to the RSF entirely. These attacks have included mass killings, sexual violence, and the destruction of villages, leading to accusations of genocide. The fighting has also raged across other areas such as the capital of Sudan, Khartoum, North Kordofan, and the state of Gezira. So, at this point you might be wondering, where does the United Arab Emirates actually fit into this picture, and why have their actions now warranted a trip to The Hague? What is it then, Damo? Well, Sudan have filed a case this month against the UAE at the ICJ, accusing them of complicity in the genocide being perpetrated by the RSF. The case alleges that the UAE has provided financial, logistical and military support to the RSF, enabling it to carry out its campaign of violence, an Arabic country funding Arabic paramilitaries against non-Arabics in Sudan, perceived to be against the RSF. In short, that's where we are. According to Sudan's legal team, the UAE's actions violate the Genocide Convention, which obligates states to prevent and punish genocide. We'll come back to that in a moment. But the case is based on extensive evidence, including satellite imagery, financial records, and testimonies from survivors. So they've got evidence there. For example, reports have documented the UAE's provision of weapons, drones, and other military equipment to the RSF, as well as its involvement in gold smuggling operations that fund the group's activities. The UAE's support for the RSF has been described as a key factor in the group's ability to sustain its campaign of violence. The Masalit, to add a bit of context as to why they are being targeted specifically, are an ethnic group primarily located in Darfur and have been amongst the primary victims of the RSF's campaign of violence, because historically the Masalit have faced persecution due to their resistance to these Arab nomadic groups and Arabic dominance across the Sahel, particularly in their region. During the Darfur conflict of the early 2000s, they were deliberately targeted again by those same Janjaweed militias that became the RSF later on. And the current conflict has just seen a resurgence of this violence and this old bad blood, if you like, with the Masalit once again bearing the brunt of it. The UAE's support for the RSF has had a direct impact on the Masalit further than that, though. By providing the RSF with the resources it needs to carry out its campaign of violence, the UAE has effectively enabled this genocide, therefore. They're payrolling it, they're supplying it, and this is why they have now been dragged to the ICJ by Sudan. These are the accusations levied against them by Sudan. The UAE has vehemently denied the allegations of complicity in genocide, describing Sudan's case as baseless and politically motivated. In a statement, the UAE government emphasised its commitment to peace and stability in Sudan and denied any involvement in the conflict. However, the evidence presented by Sudan suggests otherwise, raises serious questions about the UAE's role in the region and what exactly their endgame is here. But coming back to the matter of Israel and Gaza, I am minded to recall that the US ambassador for the UAE expressed support for Donald Trump's plan to ethnically cleanse Gaza recently by saying it was sad but unavoidable, or words to that effect. And I'll come back to the US in relation to Sudan in a moment as well, whilst we're on the subject of abject hypocrisy, let's call it. Anyway, the UAE's reaction to the ICJ case has also been marked by attempts to downplay its significance somewhat, attempting to use Israel's old excuse about jurisdiction, which doesn't exactly scream innocence, does it? Although the UAE is a signatory of the Genocide Convention, they opted out of Article 9 of the Convention, which allows dispute settlement before the ICJ when a state party violates the treaty. It's not exactly the actions of a peaceful and neutral state to do, but it also means Sudan's case against the UAE, unlike South Africa's case against Israel, is a lot weaker. However, some analysts have suggested that the UAE might be relying a little bit too much on its diplomatic influence to mitigate the fallout from the case, which is going to highlight this matter and reflect badly on them anyway, as the court of public opinion gets them, as long as attention gets drawn to it, of course. The case has certainly already damaged their reputation in Africa, especially where it has tried to position itself as a credible influence in regional security and development. Well, coming back to the US, let's come back to them, throwing further shade on the UAE's case as it does. The US has taken a strong stance against the UAE's involvement in the Sudanese conflict because they've been blocking arms sales to the country since last year over concerns about its support for the RSF. And here's an excerpt from Politico to explain. Representative Gregory Meeks, Democrat from New York, has quietly blocked arms sales to the United Arab Emirates since late last year and plans to make that hold public as he introduces a bill to take action against those fueling the war in Sudan. The UAE has been widely accused by human rights groups and outside conflict observers of covertly arming and funding a militia accused of genocide and war crimes in Sudan. Any of the four top lawmakers on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and House Foreign Affairs Committee can place a hold on arms sales. It's unclear whether Meeks' hold has actively blocked any arms transfers to the UAE as of yet. It's also unclear whether President Donald Trump would abide by such a hold. Last month, Trump announced a major $7.4 billion arms sale to Israel, despite Meeks' request that the sale be paused until he received further information on it. A break with precedent over congressional reviews of major arms sales. So weapons for Israel, Trump being Trump, none for the UAE though, both countries accused of genocide. US hypocrisy writ large it seems, but it seems that Trump may well roll over for the UAE as well, possibly, and therefore the hypocrisy would be gone, but the bad taste in the mouth would still be very much left behind. The consequences of the conflict in Sudan have been devastating for the country's people. The violence has displaced millions, creating one of the largest humanitarian crises in the world. The targeting of the Masalit and other ethnic groups is leaving entire communities destroyed and countless lives lost. The conflict has also exacerbated existing challenges, including food insecurity, poverty and disease. Some 30 million people are in need of food and medical aid right now. As bad as the situation in Gaza is, and how we must never play that down, the scale of matters in Sudan, with so many more people affected, is on a whole other level. Yet despite the scale of the atrocities, this conflict has received relatively little attention compared to other crises, such as the war in Ukraine, which has had, and even less than that for Gaza. This lack of attention has allowed the violence to continue unchecked, with devastating consequences for all those people in Sudan. Ukraine, incidentally, are formally opposed to the RSF. They have come out and are quite outspoken and are anti the RSF. But equally, so are the likes of Iran, Egypt, and the Houthis of Yemen. There's a little collective of nations, isn't there? The case against the UAE at the ICJ represents another opportunity to hold a powerful state accountable for its role in a genocide. If successful, the case could set an important precedent for the prosecution of states that support or enable atrocities, much as we hope will come out of the Israel-South Africa case. If not, it shines a light on an inadequacy in the Genocide Convention, where states can opt out of the most important bits, and that shouldn't be the case at all. What's the point of the convention if they can do that? Meanwhile, if you're going to talk in terms of genocidal intent, legislating those you are persecuting, or their land at least out of existence, must be near the top of things you could possibly do. But so it is, with the case of far-right maniac Itamar Ben-Gvir and a bill he's putting forward to the Israeli Knesset, which should go some way to doing just that. Israel taking a decades-long backward step which would utterly destroy the very notion of the two-state solution for Palestine and abolish Palestinian governance itself. And yet it's getting virtually no coverage whatsoever. Well, you can find out all about that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new content dropping daily on this channel, as well as helping to support the channel, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people. And I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.